Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending another FRAMECAD webinar today. In today's webinar, we're going to look at some new tools that we've developed for our FRAMECAD Revlink plugin with Revit. Most of those tools deal with clashes and dealing with clashes, and the other tool deals with multi-layer configurations. Today with me, I have Caroline Hang. She's one of the lead developers for our FRAMECAD Revlink plugin, and she'll be here to answer any questions or assist with anything like that at the end of the webinar. There is a question and answer feature down in the center of your screen. Throughout the webinar, you'll be able to submit questions with this feature, and then at the end, if we have enough time, we'll go through and answer as many of those questions as we can. I would also like to remind everyone that this webinar is being recorded. The recording of this webinar will be sent out in an email after the webinar. And with that said, we'll begin. So the first thing that we'll take a look at today is our interferences tool, our FRAMECAD interferences tool with Revlink. So what this tool allows us to do is it allows us to take wall panels that are being interfered with by structural elements, break those wall panels around those structural elements where we can then send them out to detailer to be built and framed, or FRAMECAD structure where we can engineer those wall panels. So we have a standard just kind of module type construction here. As you can see, we have continuous panels, and then we have structural elements that are interfering with these panels. So the first thing that we can do is with any Revlink project is I'll just quickly quick label our walls here. Now that that's done, what we'll do is we'll deal with the interferences. So to do that, what I'll do is come to FRAMECAD Revlink. We'll come to our configurations menu, and I'm going to come to clash avoidance. So from clash avoidance, currently we can clash detect with items that are in the model, but it would be a very easy task to implement this to work with linked models as well. Any linked models that this work with would be Revit linked models. So from here, what we can do is we can come down to our family list in our model. We can select the various structural components that we may want to clash detect with. We can add them to our configuration. And now that that's done, we can close our configuration. So from here, what we can do is simply select all of our walls. Now that those are selected, we can come to Revlink, and now we can run our clash avoidance tool. So now what has happened is we have been taken to a new view. That view is our FRAMECAD model space. As you can see within this model space, we have all of our panels that are separated. So they have been clash detected with that steel, and then we've broken all the panels. What the software has actually done here is it's taken their panel, so it's taken the architectural panel and actually broken that panel into parts. So now what we can do is we can select some of these elements and isolate them. Oh, sorry about that. We can isolate the category. Now, because of the modeling, there have been a few parts that have been included here that we need to exclude. So we can exclude these few parts here so they don't mess our import up. And that's just where differences in the various structural components and the modeling and things like that have come together. And I've got one last one here. So we'll exclude that. So now that's done, we can reset our layers here. And we'll go back to the architectural model. So from here, we'll select all of our wall panels. And now we can export these. Our export is successful. So now we can come over to FRAMECAD Detailer and we'll see how that imports. Our parts have imported. We can quickly build those with the auto build. We can modify and edit these panels as we want to. And finally, we can export these. So I'll export these to my desktop here. We'll select all of our panels and we'll export them. And then we can come back to our Revit model here, where we can now import these panels. So our import is successful, and you can see where we have now imported that structural steel framing around, or our CFS frame panels around this structural steel framing. So that clash avoidance is the first tool that we'll look at today. So I'll close this quickly and we'll pop over here to another model and we'll take a look at a couple of other tools we have. The first tool that we'll take a look at is the multi-layer tool. Now what this tool is intended to do is allow the user to specifically select the layers of a wall they would like to select or export in the event that they have a multi-layer type configuration. So if I quickly grab this wall and we export it, we'll save this here as M layer 1. So we'll check for multi-layers, and what the software is telling us is our wall is like a multi-layer configured wall, and that we should go back and select the specific layer that we want exported. I can continue this, so if I continue, our export is successful. Now, if we take a quick look at these walls, we'll come to the structure. Here's what I mean by a multi-layer wall. So we have a couple of elements here within that core boundary, a plasterboard and a metal stud. And without the multi-layer tool, the software may select the wrong layer and export that for us. So in our case, if I come back to Detailer, and we try to import that file. Here's our multi-layer file. So it looks like it's imported okay. If I look at the elevation, that looks like my wall. But if I try to build this wall, it's not going to build properly. And the reason is because it's exported actually the plasterboard layer, which is not a structural element, and then FRAMECAD Detailer doesn't know how to handle that. So what we can do is come back to Revit here, where we can run our multi-layer configuration and specifically select the layers that we want to export out of this wall panel. So to do that, we'll go to Revlink configurations again, and now this time we'll go to the multi-layer configurations, and it'll bring up all the wall types within our project. And you can see here we have some multi-layer walls. So I can select here to resolve that. So to do so, I'll select, and then I can simply select the layer that I want to export as my structural stud layer. So I'll select this metal stud layer here. We can save that. We can save that again. And I'll close this. And now what we can do is we can now export this wall. So I'll export this wall again. We'll save that as multi-layer 2. It's going to run our multi-layer check. And you can see this time it didn't bring up an error message because we've gone in and configured the multi-layer for that particular wall. So our export is now successful. So what we can do is go back to FRAMECAD Detailer. We can now import our new file. So multi-layer 2. So it looks like our other wall, but this time we'll build it, and you can see it's properly built a stud wall. Because we've configured our layers and we've exported the structural stud layer versus the plasterboard layer. So that's the multi-layer tool. So that could be handy for, chase wall situations, or maybe situations where you have maybe multiple structural stud layers you need to export. With that tool, if the stud layers are the same thickness, you could export them at one time. If they're different thicknesses, you could export them separately. And now the last tool that we'll take a look at is the clash openings. So we have HVAC penetrations in our walls. We have plumbing penetrations and things like that through our wall. So now what we can do is we can use our clash openings tool to detect clashes for MEP type elements, where we can then create openings. So we can then export these wall panels with openings where these clashes would occur. So to do that, I would come to my configurations menu here, and I'm going to go down to the clash openings section. Now, with the clash openings tool, we can clash detect from items within the model, or we can clash detect with items from linked models. Now, the linked models that we can clash detect with have to be linked Revit models. They can't be IFC models or anything like that. They have to be Revit models. So what we can do here is we can come down from our linked model. We can come through all these families and select the various items that we want to clash detect with. For example, our ducts, HVAC ducts, and we can add those to our configuration. We can select plumbing fixtures or pipe fittings, or sprinkler pipes or things like that, and add those to our configuration list. From our configuration list here, we have the ability to modify tolerances. So for instance, if I wanted a 1-inch tolerance around all these openings for these particular duct items, I could add those tolerances here. So what these tolerances do is, instead of creating the opening the specific size of the duct or pipe, it'll create the opening plus your tolerance on all sides. So once I'm done with my configurations and I'm happy, we can close this. And from there, we can select the specific wall that we want. We can come to FRAMECAD Revlink, and we can run our clash openings tools. And you can see now that it's created an opening for that duct in our wall panel. So now what we can do is we can export this wall panel. And my export is successful. So we can come to FRAMECAD Detailer, where we can import that panel and take a look at it. There we go. So now, if we take a look at this elevation, you can see it's created our opening for us. So what we can do, of course, is we can frame this panel, and now we can export this. And we can import this into our project here. We'll import our wall panel, and our import is successful. And so now we have our framing there in our wall panel. We can run this for additional walls, like these walls here with the plumbing as well. So again, if I go through that configurations, I can select the plumbing and other elements we want. We can select this wall panel here, And again, we can clash openings with it. So now you can see I have openings for my ducts. And if you pop down here, you can see that we have now clash openings for all of our plumbing fixtures and things like that. So again, we can export this wall panel and take a look at it. Open FRAMECAD detailer where we can import the wall panel. And if we take a look here, it's now created our wall panel with a number of openings for our plumbing fixtures along with our HVAC duct. So again, we could build this panel and then export this back to FRAMECAD or back to Revit. All of these workflows as well would work with FRAMECAD structure. So we could clash detect these panels here and then send them to FRAMECAD structure with the openings in them, where you can then run your engineering analysis on those panels and bring those engineered panels back to Revit as well. And with that being said, we've covered the three latest tools for our FRAMECAD Revlink. And now we'll go through and answer some of your questions. And I'll stop my share here and we'll go through some of the questions. Can you set offsets to the spacing around clashing objects? Can you set offsets to spacing around clashing objects? Like you saw in the Revlink, you can set those tolerances. So you can increase the opening size as much as you like. So I guess technically you could do it that way. But within FRAMECAD Detailer, you have full control over the studs set out from there. So you could always edit those, the spacing around the clashing of those objects. We have another question from Aaron. It's how do you handle a chase wall with 2 layers of framing within the structural boundary? If both of those structural layers are the same size, you can configure it with the multi-layer tool and export both layers at the same time. If those framing layers are different, say a 6-inch stud and a 3 5/8 inch stud, then I think you would need to run 2 passes to do that export. I have a question here from James. His first question says, are there plans to clash with linked models of other types besides Revit files? Caroline, I guess, do you have any input on that?
Yes, Eric. We do have a plan to also implement IFC and DWG in the future.
Okay, excellent. So currently no, but future possibly yes. Excellent, excellent. Thank you. Jason asks, can you export a clashed model to structure? Yes, certainly. Once you create those clashes in the panels, you can export them to structure. That is correct, right, Caroline? Excellent, excellent. I have another question from James. It says, when clashing with ducts, is the tolerance taken from duct face or insulation face?
From the duct face.
From the duct face. So if you had insulation on there, James, you would just need to include that insulation in your tolerance. I have another question from Aaron. Aaron's question says, door families often have different parameters. How do you handle setting tolerances around door families that cannot be typically applied to all doors?
I'll just jump in very quickly on that one, Eric. So Aaron, the doors usually, it's not intended to work for the clash, avoidance of clash and opening. So if you do want to see them, you probably have to use you can use the normal export. You don't need the clash avoidance or clash and openings. I'll just point out that the doors families, they will vary on how you create your families and how you create your parameters. But what Revlink does, it takes the actual rough opening that you create for your door families. So you can take that into account. So when you are creating your families, keep that in mind on how are you parameterizing, how your parameterization is work for your actual opening.
Great, thank you, Caroline. I have a question from Jesse. It says, so does the frame width from Revit need to match up to the framing profile for it to build correctly? Yes. When you export from Revit, Jesse, the element in your core boundary should be set up with the proper profile width to match the stud that you want to frame. And then when you import that into structure or detailer, then it will pick up that profile width from Revit, and then you would match your stud profile to that. The next question from Jesse is, does Revlink do trusses? Currently within Revlink, we cannot export trusses, but if you create them in Detailer or FRAMECAD structure, you can use Revlink to import them back into your Revit model. That's correct, right, Caroline?
Yes, I'll just point out one more thing as well, that you can export the roof as a roof panel.
Yeah.
Yeah, so then you can bring it to structural detailer, at least the outline of the roof. So then through that you can use.
Then you can create your trusses from that. Yeah, excellent. I have a question here from Luis that says, can you frame that panel and show us what it looks like? Do you know what panel, Luis? Is it the panel with the openings, maybe? Is this panel? Let's see here. If this one, yeah, I guess it treats all these as small little openings, so it'll create them as openings according to the script that you have set up in Detailer for those openings. So you could come in here and modify this script to deal with these doors and jambs as you want to. You also have to remember these are tiny little openings, so you may not want to treat them as that in FRAMECAD Detailer. And if that's the case, you could simply delete those out and reset your studs out accordingly. You don't have to frame this as an opening per se. If it's smaller than your stud spacing, you could just respace your studs out here within FRAMECAD Detailer to accommodate those small gaps. Oh, I'm sorry. I know. Here's my screen here for that panel that I was talking about, Luis. So when you frame them, it just frames them as small openings. And like I said, here in Detailer, you have full control over this. So you could respace this panel according to a different script for your panel or your openings as well, which would then affect that. So the next answer or question I have from Michael, it says, does the clash opening put in the hole through the bottom and top tracks for plumbing? So will it add a service route to the top and bottom tracks for clashes, Caroline?
That's on our plan as well.
Okay.
We hope it can happen
Okay.
soon.
Excellent.
But yeah, it is on our plan.
So in development, great. I have another question from James here. It says, when creating openings for the smaller plumbing fixtures, with the relatively small rectangles, does it create a header for all of those or just moving the studs out of the way? Seems like it would increase labor to add those headers. Yeah, James, as you saw from Detailer, it's going to treat them as like an opening. So Detailer will frame those with a header or jam studs. You could certainly reconfigure your script to modify how it frames those openings, or you could simply re-stud frame your wall. If the opening's smaller than your stud spacing, you don't necessarily have to have a header or a sill for it. So another question from Luis says, do we use structure at all, and where do you do your settings for blocking, etc.? This doesn't really pertain to structure a lot, Luis. You can run the Clash tools in Revlink as I've shown today. I've simply exported them to Detailer for simplicity and speed, as it's quicker to see and view and build the panels there. But you could always export these clash detected panels to structure and then engineer them there. I have another question from Aaron. It says, if a rough opening is cutting into a wall member, such as the top track, will FrameCAD throw an error? For example, the duct you had may clash with the top track.
I'll jump in on that, Eric. From my
Yeah.
understanding, so it looks like he wants the clash detection for after you have the frames, right? In Revit,
Yeah.
right? So that would be like a second stage. We still don't have that option yet. So
Yeah.
not for the moment.
Yeah, so currently what we're doing, Aaron, is we're pre-clashing everything. So we're creating pre-openings for stuff. If you frame your panel and realize that you have that track in the way, that like Caroline said, that would then be a second stage of clash detection where you would actually clash detect with all the numbers in. Another question from Michael says, does the clash opening detect windows and doors and put those in? Windows and doors are detected automatically as windows and doors when you export panels. So those are treated separately than these clashed items. Let's see. Question from Luis says, shop drawings, can you show what the drawing would look like? I showed the elevation of that detailer panel. And that showed what the opening would look like. If you printed that, then it would certainly look the same there. As I'm questions, we just have a limited time left. Any questions that we don't get in, we'll respond to after the session. So James says, can you please do .nwc or coordination models? Do you know what that might be, Caroline?
Yeah. I'm not quite sure if he wants you to demonstrate that one, but probably if it is, we won't have time for that one. But yeah, you can use your model because it's a Revit model entirely. So you can put that one into Navisworks, and then you can run your model from there and then do your coordinations. Because it's still a Revit model, so you can do everything you do normally with it.
Great. Thank you, Caroline.
No.
I have a question from Joseph that says, what is the precision of imported drawings? I'm not sure I quite understand exactly what he means there, the precision of imported drawings.
Yeah, I'm not sure I can understand as well, but if he's saying what, like the profiles, maybe dimensions and values, if it's that one, then it's the same information. You just have to like adapt the family type catalog to what you need.
Okay, excellent. And I think that is all of the questions today. Oh, sorry, I had another one come in by Luis. If you have a model drawn in structure, can you export the model as an IFC to Revit?
Yes, you can. From structure, you can export an IFC model. Yes.
Yeah. Excellent. I think that's all of the questions today. If there are no more, I guess that'll end our webinar. Before it closes, I'd just like to remind everyone that we'll have another webinar on April the 14th. In that webinar, we'll be going over how to properly set up your roll forming machine in Detailer. and an invitation or a sign up for that webinar will be included in the email that you receive after this webinar with the link to the video. Thank you all very much for attending and have a wonderful day. Regards.